Hello and welcome to our workshop on data preservation and digital marketing in a post-cookie world. My name's Ian Harris and I think this is the most important webinar we've done to date. There are many changes taking place and have taken place over the past few years around privacy, cookies, and recently iOS changes. And I don't think many people really get the scale of the impact of all of this, and even less know what they should be doing about it. So thank you very much for joining. Our aim today is to explain it all to you and then hopefully put you ahead of your competitors. So first of all, a bit of housekeeping. The workshop should last for about 45 minutes. If you have any questions as we go along, please send them to us via the chat box at the side of the screen. So it should be fairly obvious where you type in. And we'll spend a few minutes at the end of the presentation to answer as many of these as possible. But if we don't get to your question, excuse me, we will get back to you by email and make sure everything is answered. Okay, so first of all, a little bit briefly for those of you who aren't familiar with Search Laboratory, we're an integrated global digital marketing agency of around 150 people, split between offices in the UK, where we are right now, and in the US. So we've got an office in New York and also Austin. Now, as well as running campaigns in the channels that you see on this slide, so SEO, pay-per-click, programmatic, social media, a major part of what we do is also analytics, and we're one of only a handful of companies authorized to sell and support Google Analytics 360. So because of this, we have a team of analytics and tracking experts, as well as digital strategists. So your speakers for today, so that's me. I'm Ian Harris. I'm the founder and chief and executive chairman of Search Laboratory. I'm joined by James Kenny, head of programmatic, and Jimmy McCann, head of digital strategy. And what we'll be talking about today is this. So I'll just set the scene and just make sure everybody's on the same page and understands what's happened with cookies and how that's actually working. And then Jimmy is going to look from an analytics perspective and have a look at the impact of these privacy changes on analytics. And he'll also take us through some relatively simple tech solutions that will mitigate some of the problems that are being caused. And then, so that's Jimmy on analytics, and then James will do the same on advertising. So that's display, social, and the like. So problems occurring and simple workarounds. But what we'll learn from this is that these workarounds only go so far, and that you really need to start to rethink measurement, testing and advertising if you want to get ahead. So we'll go through some broader solutions to help you get ahead. So kicking off, a background glossary. So just a few concepts that we need everybody to be aware of. First one is very simple, cookies. So this is a browser that goes to the site buypens.com, and the browser requests a page. It basically says, show me your pens. The site responds with, here's that page of pens, and it sends a cookie. It gives an ID. You are now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then any requests from that point forwards, that browser will ask for the page, but it will also say, I am that user, I'm user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are what we call first-party cookies. They're written and read by the site that you are looking at. That is a first-party cookie. They string interactions together and they string sessions together. If the cookie persists between sessions, they string that together. These cookies, sometimes called session cookies, they're not going anywhere. So we're talking about a cookieless world. These cookies are not going anywhere. These are part of the fabric of the internet. Another concept, so again, this browser requests a page. The page is sent back, but there's a piece of there's a piece of Facebook code on that page which tells the browser to go and call Facebook. So buypens.com told me to call you, and then Facebook will respond, and it will then plant a cookie if there isn't one already there. This is called a third-party cookie. It's written and read by a different site to the one that you are looking at. That is a third-party cookie. So the third-party site identifies you whenever it's called. So if I go to buypaper.com the next day, and that site also has the Facebook code on it, this call will happen again, and that same ID will be used. So Facebook now know that one day I was on buypens.com, the next day I was on buypaper.com. So this cookie is used whenever that user browses to any site that has that Facebook code on it, and indeed when that user browses to Facebook itself. Okay, that is a third-party cookie. Now, just one to just clarify, because I always think this is a strange one. The Google Analytics cookie, I always think, well, that sounds like a third-party cookie. It isn't. The Google Analytics cookie is a first-party cookie. Even though the Google Analytics property, it's a kind of third-party website that you look at to look at your data, the cookie is written as a first-party cookie. So every time that you browse to that website, it sends that same cookie back, and we can track you page to page, session to session. So it is a first-party cookie. However, just one thing to note about this cookie. First-party cookies are written by the server, and they're a little bit of a faff. They're a little bit difficult to implement. So Google and other sites as well, other analytics sites, make this very easy for you by allowing you to put a little piece of JavaScript on a page, and then I won't go into the detail of how this actually works, but it's that piece of JavaScript on the page that makes sure that cookie gets written. This is called a client-side first-party cookie. It's written through JavaScript that is implemented on the page and runs on the client, on the browser. It's called a client-side first-party cookie. It's still a first-party cookie, but it's written in this way that makes it very easy for website owners to implement the cookie. Okay, now the Google Analytics cookie can be written server-side as well. And we're going to come on and we're going to discuss actually what's the difference between this happening, because actually these privacy systems and browsers will deal with these cookies differently, whether they're written server-side or client-side. So it is possible, it's a bit harder, but it is possible to write the Google Analytics cookie server-side if you know what you're doing. Okay, the final concept is what we call app tracking. So here is my mobile phone, and I load up the Facebook app. The Facebook app can get access to something on my phone, on my mobile phone, that's called a device ID. So every mobile has a device ID. It's a unique identifier, and with permission now, the Facebook app can get access to that, and therefore when it fetches your feed from Facebook, it lets Facebook know exactly who you are, but also this device ID. And that device ID, Twitter can also access it, again with permission. It can access that same ID. So these device IDs can let advertisers link data across activity with other apps and websites. So that's another concept that that is changing. So we'll discuss what's happening to all of this. So privacy and regulation, what's been happening? They're kind of two different concepts, privacy and regulation. So privacy, to start with, ITP is part of the privacy set of directives that's happening. So ITP is an Apple initiative. So on Safari, Apple have decided that third-party cookies, so that's those things that that we just looked at, tracking that Facebook activity, we don't want those anymore. So third-party cookies gone. First-party cookies will only last 7 days, okay? Or 1 day if it's a client-side first-party cookie. So you understand the distinction between those cookies. And the reason why they're distinguishing is because generally a cookie that's written client-side is normally a tracking cookie, as opposed to one of those session cookies, those essential cookies. So Safari via ITP is distinguishing between those, and it's deleting these cookies based on certain rules. Then we have app tracking transparency. So this is the iOS change. So in iOS 14.5 and above, users are now being given the choice of allowing those that cross-environment tracking, which is basically, are we going to allow the app access to that device ID? Now, most users are saying no to that stuff. So all that tracking between apps is going. And then Chrome, which is kind of following what Safari's doing, but you've probably read that their updates have now been delayed until early 2023. So it was going to be 2022. Third-party cookies going, first-party cookies okay for now. So for example, 2 years for the Google Analytics cookie, but changes, those third-party cookies will be going early 2023. So that's privacy. We've also got regulation, so that's GDPR and CCPA, and that is this cookie consent. And in short, if you don't get consent, you can't have the cookies, and therefore you can't be tracked. Again, there's different cookies, and you go into these cookie permission systems, and you can say, right, which ones I'm going to accept and which ones I'm not going to accept. But if you don't accept the cookies, they're not going to be written, and therefore that any technology attached to them will not work. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Jimmy now, who is going to tell us all about what's happened to your first-party data in relation to analytics.
Thanks, Ian. So yeah, what's actually happened to your first-party data, so analytics data here. As we go on. So here we have 2 user paths. One user path was successful, one was unsuccessful. The dots here in this context are sessions, and we have the lines which represent a user following different sessions along that customer journey. So there we have the 2 separate user paths. One, the success being a conversion, so that would be the thing that you want them to do at the end of their journey, be it a transaction or a form fill or something like that. So then we move on to take those 2 paths and extrapolate that out to multiple number of journeys, and that's how it would look on this way of displaying it across all these different journeys. We have lots of varying lengths of journey, some successful, some unsuccessful, some might even be a single touch point resulting in success or failure. So so we take all those journeys, and then if we think back to an earlier digital age, and the tracking technology that Ian's just explained there related to analytics, in a pre-smartphone, early smartphone era, we had much less cross-device behaviors, and a lot of the browsing activity took place on a single device, on a single browser. So by and large, these customer journeys, these paths, were largely unbroken. We could see all of the connections and these multiple interactions across individuals' journeys, and we could aggregate that and take learnings from that and understand and play to that with our digital marketing. So then if you see what just happened there, as we go down to cross-device, you'll be able to see that some of the linkages between those customer paths were lost. So in a cross-device environment, we have separate cookie placed on a separate device on a separate browser, which means that the path, if the paths are still the same, if it's cross-device, then we will naturally struggle to connect those dots in short. And then if we move on to the privacy scenario, we can also see that more of the linkages between those customer journeys are degraded and lost. So for example, in the context of ITP, we saw that time shortened and to 28 days, and now it's at 7 days, like Ian explained before. So we have seen a lot of data degraded in the last couple of years, and this has been a gradual process. We also have the regulation changes. So now in in the EU and California and Canada, there's explicit regulation around you have to explicitly ask consent. So if somebody refuses consent to place a cookie, we cannot track them. We cannot place the cookie on that individual's browser. So the implications of this mean that not only do we lose some more of the touch points that string together, we also lose some of the touch points themselves and some of the conversion data. So what does all the degradation in first-party data mean for you? So in short, it's all about, it's inaccurate measurement. So we cannot stitch together the full user journey. It's a broken journey now, and those insights that we can gather are severely reduced. And as I mentioned before, this is something that's happened over and has choked the process of connecting these paths and joining these dots together. So it's not something that's happened overnight. What we can take from that is that if we don't have the right insights and information coming back to us, then we can't make the best decisions. So it could lead to an inefficient marketing spend. So what should we do? So here we have our broken journey scenario. We can start by implementing consent mode. So this is a feature of Google Tag Manager. It's a piece of code and a setting that you would enable. And what happens there, if you just look back to what happened with the animation, is that it restored the conversion touch points. So what happens is that consent mode doesn't track, it respects the user's refusal of consent to place a cookie. However, it does place a cookie, it does produce a cookieless ping back to a platform such as Google Ads or Google Analytics to indicate that a conversion has occurred. So that means that using the modeling that Google possesses in these platforms, it can model out conversions back to almost 80–90% of the lost data. The second step we would definitely recommend is implementing Google Analytics 4 or GA4. This is the latest, most sophisticated version of Google Analytics. It's built on the current behaviors of use, and it's built around a user. It's user-centric, whereas previous versions of analytics have been more session-specific and traffic-led, whereas this is more user. So its definition of a user is built on 3 layers. So at first it would use a user ID. So that would be a customer-specific ID related to that is identified when somebody logs in or authenticates into a website. That can be used then in combination with the client ID, which is the user-specific ID set by the cookie, to deduplicate the users across different devices and get a better view of that user and their entire journey across many devices, and when a cookie has been deleted, for example. And then the final layer of defining a user in GA4 would be Google Signals. So Google Signals uses aggregated information from users that have opted into advertising preferences within Google's platform. So for example, Gmail, Chrome, and when you're logged into Google search, etc. It would use all of that information to try and dedupe these users further. And then the final piece of the puzzle that would restore and preserve as much of these the stringing of the touch points together is server-side Google Tag Manager. So Ian mentioned before whether the cookie was set by the client or whether the cookie was set by the server. So this is server-side Tag Manager. So that would mean that the cookie is set by the server. That means that it would bypass any stipulations from Safari that would delete a cookie after 1 or 7 days. We would see the persistence of that user information across 2 years, which is default for Google Analytics. So I'll now pass over to James, who can talk about the advertising platforms.
Thanks, Jimmy. So yes, on the side of advertising platforms, we can talk about how third-party side of cookies is going to impact things moving forward and has impacted things so far. The principles are largely the same in terms of cookie preservation and data preservation, but there are a few nuances that change things up and a few impacts, in particular in terms of planning your campaigns and how to handle changes moving forward. So as a quick sort of overall summary, there are 2 ways largely in which we would run ads, or the campaigns are managed across all channels, be that search, social, display, video, affiliates, etc. And that is the ad platform data, which is again third-party data, as it doesn't belong to your website, is used to identify users for the purpose of targeting, and also used to bring that data back to you in terms of how they interact with either your ad or the sites that you're advertising on, or your own website in the form of measurement, metrics, and reporting. These ad platforms themselves have been impacted as well by all the changes. So in terms of the website, you've got the cookie changes, with most of them being gone and Chrome having a bit of a delay, but heading in the direction of dropping them as well. And then on the device ID side of things, the app and mobile web side of things, things are in many ways going to be impacted a bit quicker. iPhone is a significant portion of the market, and less than 10% of people is the general estimate of people who will regularly consent to being tracked. And then not long after Apple launched ITP, Google followed with an announcement saying they would be doing the same for Android, with the current general plan being that it will be rolling out late 2021 on some Android devices, and then 2022 across the rest of the Android stack. So in a similar way to everything that's been discussed so far, we are going to see this data that these ad platforms rely on begin to disappear and change over time. So what does this mean? Well, first, it impacts the targeting that is available to us. A lot of audience profiling has historically been based on the idea of being able to measure user behavior across a long period of time, track what they do, and then collate, anonymize, and aggregate it into audience groups that can then be reached. This happened in various ways. Lots of different platforms do it in different ways, but a significant portion of it has come down to the ability to track users and know that it's the same person across a long period of time. Losing that means that the ability to build some of the more granular data or get perfect accuracy on users has been reduced, and in some cases audience sizes will have changed. In other cases we've seen audience performance drop as certain audiences just in targeting options don't work quite as well as they used to. Additionally, Remarketing is also seeing an impact because, again, that depends on preserving the ID of the user between them first visiting your website and then coming back later, interacting with whatever platform you're working with, Facebook, Google, Bing, LinkedIn, whatever of those it is, and knowing that it's the same person throughout the process. So losing that data either through people not consenting to be tracked or just through general cookie or ID deletion, that has generally led to remarketing being reduced. You may not always know it looking at your remarketing lists. They may look like a similar size because the initial ID hasn't disappeared everywhere. It's the ability to then know that another person matches an ID on the list. So generally, we've seen the impact through cost of impressions, reach, clicks, and metrics like that. This also has an impact on the way we measure activity, and this applies differently across different platforms, but broadly there's two ways that all the different platforms that you could work on measure. One is post-click, where someone clicks the ad and then goes to the site and interacts, engages, buys, fills out a form, whatever you want them to do. That window is being reduced heavily because of the ability to track cookies over a long period of time. So if someone clicks and then they take 2 weeks to turn around and convert without really interacting in the meantime, then there's going to be a lot of data loss kind of on that extent. And this has been the most significant impact of this so far has been all of them visible on, say, Facebook, where they've reduced all their windows of attribution and the ability to track people and optimize campaigns down from 28 days to 7 days as an absolute maximum. A bigger impact has been had on post-view conversions. So these are where someone doesn't click an ad but sees it. This is commonly in display and video. They just see it and then they'll come to the site later through another channel or directly and then convert there. This is significantly limited in its ability to track because ultimately, if no one's clicking and no one's going through the journey click by click, there's no opportunity for you to ask for consent. There's no opportunity for you to ask consent because they come to the site and become a remarketing list. There's not necessarily always opportunities for the ad platforms to ask. And as per all the current rules, when you don't ask for consent, if you don't have it explicitly, it's no consent. So a lot of data is being lost there, and most platforms have responded to this by upping the level of data that's estimated or significantly reducing the amount and time frame over which they track this information. And ultimately, in the same way as when Jimmy explained analytics, this results in an inefficient marketing spend if you stick with the same strategy that you're currently working with. So what should you do? Well, there's a lot of different things to potentially do, and I've broken it down into 6 main bullet points that are somewhat platform agnostic. So you should be able to take some combination of them and apply them to whatever campaign, whatever activity you're currently working on. In terms of targeting, the first one is to make use of your first-party data. Jimmy went on a bit about this earlier, but ultimately, if you do everything that we've said so far in terms of getting the most out of your analytics, getting the most out of your data, then that will give you the best view possible in terms of deciding where advertising budgets need to go, where your focus needs to be in your campaigns and your marketing to work out where to get the maximum impact. Additionally, review where you can gather CRM data, or for that matter, data of any sort that doesn't rely on cookies and that you can store and upload and use later in platforms, usually names, email addresses, those sorts of things. A lot of websites, not even necessarily ones selling stuff, will be using this. It's a common thing that you see on news sites. They will require you to sign up in order to read a story. All you need to do is put an email address in, and then you can read the rest of the story. This is fairly common and will generally result in being able to get more information over a longer period of time. So if you have the ability to ask, for example, people are browsing products on the site and maybe they see something out of stock, but you can offer to maybe send an email if it's in stock, that sort of information will give you the ability to track people over a long period of time without having to rely on cookies or device IDs. Secondly, look at what other people's first-party data can use for you. So have a look at the platforms and the targeting they're using and what that targeting is relying on. A lot of these platforms that are most commonly used across Google and Microsoft with LinkedIn and Facebook, they rely on a lot of data that is external to their platform, but also a lot of data that's logged in. So things like behavioral targeting may take a hit, but the ability on LinkedIn to know what someone's job title is not going anywhere, because that's something that's declared in the platform. It doesn't rely on any of this technology at all. So have a look at what the options are, work out which ones you're using, and see if potentially you can use or trial some of the alternative versions of targeting if you're losing reach with your current strategy. Also, if you're working with publishers, you're working across display and video or native or any kind of areas focused on buying placements elsewhere, get in touch and discuss with them their targeting options. If they're a big publisher, and most publishers are now, that most people tend to work on, they often are tracking their own information, just like with the newspaper email required to read the rest of the story I mentioned earlier. That's an example of a publisher gathering data so that they can make use of it when they're selling advertising deals later on. And talk with them. They often have a lot of information. They're well aware of what's going on, and a lot of them are willing to put together specific options. They're willing to work with advertisers because ultimately they want to preserve the revenue that they get from it. Finally, have a look at the alternative targeting and the optimization available. So contextual targeting still works. It's the oldest form of targeting. It's been around forever. It kind of has gone up and down in importance depending on what people think about audiences, but the ability to target a page based on what it's about, the ability to target someone based on certain keywords or topics, or even the page itself that they're on, that isn't going anywhere. That doesn't rely on cookies at all. And it works well. So in a lot of cases, if you can't, say, retarget to your users, that doesn't mean you can't target websites about what you do, or about reviews of what you do, or about your brand name itself, and find people who are likely shopping around, say, looking at reviews of you, looking at alternatives, and looking at competitors. And targeting those people will not be exactly the same as targeting a remarketing audience, but it emulates a lot of that concept. Just use some common sense, think about where the audience is going, and see if you can emulate it through contextual targeting. Finally, have a look at the other elements that aren't targeting. Creative and placement matter as much as user targeting. In fact, going by some metrics, they matter more than the actual targeting you use. So if you are going to invest your advertising dollars or your campaign dollars into something that is going to make a difference, if the targeting is limited in what you can do, that's fine. There's probably a lot more that people can do with creative, a lot more you can do with your ads to tailor them to different groups, a lot more that you can do to make them more broadly applicable, and a lot more you can do in terms of working out where they actually appear, testing those things out. So take the time spent on targeting and consider where else it can be spent across your campaigns. On the measurement side of things, first thing is use your CRM. If you don't have a CRM, consider getting a CRM or building a CRM or some sort of system where you're able to track what people do and export that information. Export the information about the converting users or users who at a certain point, so you can upload them to the ad platforms as offline conversions. Pretty much every platform supports some kind of offline conversion. It's been a common thing going for a very long time since this process started. So it's very easy to do and is definitely worth doing, even if you still think your tracking is up to spec, even if you still think it's working well enough, upload the offline conversions anyway, get them added onto that list. Just in more data is not bad. There's no scenario in which doing it is going to harm your campaign. Additionally, while you're doing that, make sure that your internal tracking and the way you track users through a journey on the CRM is up to scratch. We've seen plenty of cases where we'll know what a user is at the point of a lead, but we will no longer know where they came from at the point of a conversion, because there's different systems and different teams dealing with different elements, and not everyone updates things correctly and up to date, or not everyone uses the right protocols to do so. So ensure that your internal tracking is up to scratch, because you're not going to be able to fall back on some of these other products such as analytics or anything like that when it comes to your advertising campaigns to make sure that they work. There's also some tracking workarounds to use and some things that basically rely on cookieless technology. So Jimmy already mentioned cookieless pings and what could be achieved with the analytics stack. Facebook is currently the most public on their workaround, which is called a conversions API. It's been around for a while. Actually, it used to be called the server-side API. And that's a good opportunity to set something up where conversion data will just pass straight back to Facebook, no cookie required, and you can just set it up and then it'll work in the same way it always has, but Facebook will be able to use its own data that it never loses, you'll be able to use your data you'll never lose, and then that way you can maintain kind of a maximum possible level of conversion tracking. There aren't a huge amount of updates from a lot of other ad platforms, so some work more than others. The Google stack obviously relies heavily on analytics. Facebook's got this, but LinkedIn, Twitter, affiliate platforms and the like, they are working on various updates. So just keep in touch with your agency, your team, your account manager if you have one, and just make sure that you are made aware of any new developments as and when they happen. And finally, align the tracking across all platforms. Now that the advertising world is being somewhat walled off by the inability to just pass an ID between different places, that means that there's going to be fewer opportunities to use information in one platform to directly influence something on another platform. You'll still be able to look at things on a grand scale, and that's why working on an analytics platform is super important. But at the end of the day, you can't pass analytics data straight to Facebook and expect it to use it to optimize its bids. So implement something like a tag manager or a process that will let you evenly track things across the board, and then start making sure that if there is a purchase that you care about, or a page view that you care about, or a button click that you care about, every single platform that you're working on tracks it. And that way you can make sure that whenever you learn something in analytics about if people interact with this page, it means X, you can then adapt to that in every single other platform that you're using. Finally, the big long-term aim with all of this is that we need to start rethinking a bit about how we look at advertising. And this is a process that some companies have been on, some businesses haven't got started on it. But at the end of the day, we've gone from this picture to this picture, and this is with everything that we can currently do. It's still a lot less than what we had a long time ago. And all of those journeys, whether they're completely joined up or not, represent users heading down the funnel. Like even from the beginning dot on the left, just one across and then you lose track of them, they've still got closer to converting. And you already know from all the tracking we've already done that, you know, the users will head in this direction. This is the only way in which conversion can eventually happen. So it's important to make sure that you're not just focusing on one side of it because it's just the only area where you can get a full funnel view. So have a look at what you can do at the upper funnel and the beginning of a user journey to drive your brand, and have a look at what KPIs that means. Does that mean reach? Does that mean engagement? What kind of metrics indicate to you that people have interest in your business, even if you don't necessarily know if they're going to convert yet? Because the more people you drive down there, the more you go down the more you get people to move down the funnel. And then at the other end, make sure that you're driving results as well. Like use that separately. But the point is that these are two separate campaigns. They're two different strategies. There may be two different teams working on these things. And it's important to make sure that the whole thing is being put together. So I'll hand back to Jimmy to talk about where we go from here.
Thanks, James. So yeah, where do we go? I think basically we cannot join all the dots anymore. So we've got to undertake a process and look at things a little bit differently and track things a little bit differently and incorporate this different measurement. So it's 4 steps in this process. So it's all about data preservation, enriching your data with as much first-party data as possible. It's then doing analysis projects to then surface key insights that you can then finally activate within your marketing activity. So I'm going to go through each of these with an example. So first of all, what we mean by data preservation is those 3 key things that we talked about earlier on. It's preserving as much of that analytics data as possible through consent mode, through GA4 stitching together the user, and mitigating any ITP problems with server-side GTM. The second point is enrichment. So what we mean by enrichment is on the left-hand side, you can see web behavioral data. You've got things like geolocation, channel, keywords, pages viewed in there. That's all your behaviors and characteristics from the website. But then your CRM has an awful lot of rich information that we would benefit from by joining that together with the website. So for example, on the CRM, you would understand whether a lead turned into a paying customer. You would also understand what is the lifetime value of a given customer over a certain period of time. You might also have all predefined customer personas, whether it's high, medium, low, or whether it's customers that sit a certain profile and affinity for certain products or services. By joining all of that information, we can connect what's happening offline and online in one global data set. Then when we come to the analysis side, we would take our preserved and enriched data on the left-hand side and then leverage the cloud technologies that exist and you know, engineering capabilities that you can do within that space, and the machine learning and you know, the vast breadth of analysis that you can do on large data sets. What you can do then is come up with data projects that are on the right hand side. So you could potentially score your leads. So you're not just talking on a binary basis of if there was a lead or no lead, it's a large breadth of quality of lead, so that you can potentially optimize to the best quality leads. You might also want to predict the lifetime value based on their behaviors and a user's behaviors online, and what, comparing that to what you know from historic data in your CRM. You might also want to undertake an audience scoring project. So that would be based on the behaviors of a user on your site, whether they converted or not. You know, you could understand how engaged they were and the potential quality based on what they did. We can then also do customer segmentation. So this is ingesting your predefined personas that might exist in the CRM, and then being able to segment those users, but within the you know, the web data side of things, so in Google Analytics. And then finally, we might be able to do a project around attribution as well. So that's reevaluating how much value an activity or a channel has driven over a certain you know, time frame, and be able to make better decisions from that. So then the final part of this is, once you've done your projects and surfaced the key insight, it is activating that within the various ad technologies. So, you know, we can do value smart bidding on leads, for example. Then, so it's you know, you've valued the really good leads higher, so you want to influence the machine to optimize more towards those leads as opposed to the lesser quality ones. You might also want to bid to a predicted lifetime value, which we just spoke about. That could revolutionize your e-commerce activity. For example, if you are currently optimizing to a last click transactional value of $20, if you knew that customer was potentially worth $150 within a year time frame, that could completely transform what you're willing to pay for that type of customer. Audience scoring, we would again be able to then segment remarketing audiences into high or medium and low, and be a bit more efficient with that. If they've authenticated and you've captured you know, some of their first party data in the form of contact details or anything like that, you can then use that to plug that back into the advertising platforms as far as it goes with the customer match, and then target similar audiences on the back of that. And the customer segmentation piece, we can actually integrate and have a consistent message for users at different stages based on your CRM data and what you know about them already. So you could have, using the customer match method, much more consistent messaging in these different areas across the Google and, say, Facebook networks. And then finally, attribution. So again, we would activate that information and potentially bid to reattributed numbers. And it would also play a role in budgeting and being able to spend money in the right areas and value the things that are going to drive not just conversions, but drive reach to the relevant people in what James was speaking about before. So that entire process can be carved up into two distinct areas. So you have essentials on the left-hand side, the preservation and enrichment, but then those two things build the foundations for you to then get ahead of your competition and drive performance in this new world going forward, in this privacy safe world.
Okay, thanks, Jimmy. So yeah, just in summary, really, the situation has been eroding for the past few years, and it's really come into sharp focus with iOS 14.5 and the loss of also the loss of third-party tracking cookies. But your advertising has been inefficient for some time, and really, you know, people are starting to sit up and take notice. There are some things that you need to do immediately, like consent mode, the GA4 upgrade. Consent mode is free. The GA4 upgrade is free. Server-side GA cookies, that's through Tag Manager. Facebook Conversions API, uploading offline conversions. These are all things that are just best practice now, and they're, you know, that you might need some help setting them up, but they're all free technologies. So all those things you really need to do, but to get ahead, you need to look at those clever ways to optimize your unique situation. And that's the stuff that Jimmy's just talked about. So what first party data do you have? What can you join with analytics? What can you infer with data techniques or machine learning? And how should you activate and measure your own full funnel advertising? So it's hard, it's not all plug and play anymore. If you do need help with any of this stuff, this is what we do. So please get in contact. Also, I'll just remind you, if there are any questions right now, please just type them into the chat box, and we will answer as many as we possibly can. So the other final thing to mention is that we do have our data and privacy resources hub. So it's on the URL at the top there. These will be sent round afterwards. And there's all sorts of stuff in there. There's white papers, there's blog posts, and you can see how this story builds up. There's podcasts in there. So all sorts of different resources to get you going and help you in this area. So we're about out of time, apart from 4 questions. So let's just have a quick look. So we have a question. Is the third-party cookie called by the Facebook pixel code? And does the first-party cookie from ByPens still get even if one more third parties get set? Yes. So I think I know what you're saying there. So the first party cookie by bypens.com gets set regardless. Okay. The third party cookie from Facebook is almost independent of that. So the third party cookie by Facebook may or may not get set depending on the permissions and the you know, whether it's ITP, whether it's Safari or not, but they are both completely independent cookies. So I hope that answers that particular question. We have another question, which is why now? So Google are obviously delaying their removal of third-party cookies and the way that they're dealing with privacy. So why don't we just carry on and do what we've always been doing until they catch up? James, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. There's two reasons to start thinking about this now, irrespective of when any deadlines are going to be. One is, if you aren't doing it, someone else will be. We as an agency are trying to get all our clients to follow these things, so we are trying to get them as much of a leg up on the market and the competition when it comes to this as possible, because ultimately it leads to better data, which leads to better everything else. So it's something which, this is a zero-sum game, digital marketing and advertising. So it's something where you need to be, at the very least, keeping up and getting ahead where possible in order to ensure that what you are able to work with is the same toolkit as what other people are able to work with. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that it is not necessarily a quick process. Like Ian said, a lot of this stuff is free and best practice and available, and there's all sorts of resources available to get things set up. But setting up a new instance of analytics takes time. Getting APIs set up so that you can pass conversions takes time. You may need assistance with it. There's going to be various changes and updates, and the market will change a lot over time, very much in the direction of more data loss as things continue. So you really want to kind of get started now, otherwise you're really just making life harder for yourself down the road, or at least planning out what you're doing, getting things set up and getting the data in. I guess along with that, you also have to remember that the data that you are losing now, you're not going to get back just because you implemented these new features. These new features are only going to be able to track things from the moment they're implemented. So the sooner you implement them, the more data you have available to you. So there's a bonus third point. But yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Probably for you as well, James, is regulation going to have a greater impact moving forward? So do we expect things to get better, get worse? What do we reckon?
The general expectation, I would argue, is the broad direction things are going, is that regulation is going to become a bigger limit on how things work. So right now, there's a lot of technical pieces that are being put into effect, but the big changes are in the EU, GDPR, there's the CCPA in the US, and those are quite serious rules in terms of what you can do. They're just not completely enforced, and a lot of people aren't following them. But gradually, we're going to have to. Gradually, everyone's going to have to get on board, because it's ultimately against the law to not be doing it. And we've seen that now in a lot of big companies. Amazon, which has always classically been the company that does not really do much with cookies and has committed to the either not talking about them or using the very old, if you browse this site, you consent to cookies, which is completely illegal under CCPA and GDPR. They have recently started to move towards more detailed cookie consent things. Most websites that rely on use kind of out-of-the-box solutions or certain kinds of servers also are obliged to do it. And some of you listening may have found that you had to as part of the way things are set up or requirements. So, and as those change and as those rules become more impactful and more significant, they're going to, a lot of these new rules are going to be somewhat self-inflicted when it comes to data losses, in terms of you having to choose to allow people to not be tracked. So even the current set of rules, they're going to get stricter on policing them. If they go in any direction, the expectation is that they'll get stricter, because a lot of what has already been agreed on is a watered down version of what was originally proposed.
Yeah. Okay. So a final question before we close. This one for you, Jimmy. How does GA enhanced e-commerce work into all of this? So GA enhanced e-commerce, which is a sort of section of normal universal analytics.
So I mean, as far, GA4 does have e-commerce, so I suppose in as far as GA4 goes, you know, you would retain in you know, e-commerce related tracking metrics, and you can use them for projects going forward.
So, yeah. Okay. So Universal Analytics, which is where GA enhanced e-commerce really sits, it is being completely replaced by GA4, and it's got a similar system in it, has it?
Yes,
Similar tracking mechanisms in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah,
nothing will be lost.
Nothing will be
GA4
lost.
is an improvement on
Yeah. Okay.
On Universal.
Yeah. So the important thing here is that GA4 is the new version of analytics. It is free and it is better, and you do need to get on it, because at some point old analytics, Universal Analytics, will be retired and the data is not transferable. So you need to get on it now. And then, you know, systems like GA enhanced e-commerce, they're all in there, but more. You know, there's a lot more features, and more will come. All the development is happening in GA4 now, so you need to get onto it. If you don't do anything else, get onto GA4. Right, okay, ever so sorry, that's all we have time for. If you have any other questions, then please contact us, and we'll get straight back to you. There's some contact details on the next slide, so they're there. So all that remains is to say thanks for joining us. Thanks to our panelists, Jimmy and James. Thanks to James's neighbour's dog for its contribution to the proceedings. If you have any questions or you need any help with any of this stuff, please contact us, and we'll help you. There's a lot of bespoke stuff in there that you might need help with. But thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.